Welcome to Voodoo Whiskey Gaming, and this is my late review of Max Payne. I played it on the Xbox Series X via backwards compatibility. It's also available on the Xbox Series S, Xbox One, and PC. I know you can get it on Steam, but I do know there are some issues with the Steam version. So let's get into it. You play as a cop named Max Payne, and basically immediately your wife and child are murdered by a bunch of junkie scum. You deal with them and you decide to go undercover working for the DEA on major drug cases. Unfortunately, your contact is murdered almost immediately, which throws you into a massive mystery. And I gotta say, I love the story in this game. And I specifically really love the storytelling. It's definitely designed to be ye oldie, like film noir. There's a lot of narration, a lot of kind of cheesy dialogue and lines. And like the way things are described very much fit that noir vibe. And I really like that. I think it really stood out at the time, and I think even now it really stands out because you don't get a lot of that noir vibe anymore, especially like in the storytelling. You may get some of that like noir city kind of vibe, but the storytelling here really hits that. Now let's get into the voiceover work and whatnot, and it is pretty good. It's not amazing. It definitely varies in quality. I would say Max Payne, the voice actor there, definitely does a better job than most of the others, but even then, you know, not every line is delivered flawlessly, but it does kind of work with how cheesy the dialogue is. Now, a lot of the other voiceover work is not on that level, and so even with the cheesier dialogue, it doesn't exactly work. As for the sound effects, what I will say is I love that there's a very wide variety of sound effects. Like, you look back and consider how old this game is, it's actually impressive. Like, all the different guns sound different. You can hear bullet casings drop. There's different footstep sound effects for depending on what you're stepping on, which sounds silly now, but back then, like, you maybe had one footstep sound effect. That being said, they all sound pretty shit. As for the music in this game is great. It works perfectly with the storytelling. It works perfectly with the action. It's a fantastic soundtrack. Now let's get into the gameplay mechanics and whatnot, and this is a third-person action shooter. And this game was one of the early games to be using bullet time after the Matrix and all of that. And they did a good job with it. You can kick on bullet time when you need to, just to run around and use it, or like when you start doing dives and jumping forward, jumping back, jumping around, it'll jump into bullet time. Which admittedly, I've got to say, the bullet time doesn't necessarily save your ass, but it is nice and it looks cool. And I guess I didn't remember it, but there is kind of like an auto lock feature, and that comes in super handy in this game because I'll get into it, but certain things have not aged phenomenally. But I mean, it really is running level to level, and most of the levels or chapters or sections, whatever you want to call them, are actually fairly short and they're nice bite-sized chunks. Although I will say I wish the checkpointing was better. There were definitely times where I lost, you know, a good 10-15 minutes of like intense firefights that I barely scraped through, only to die in some bullshit and lose all that, so that did suck a bit. But I mean, the gameplay is fairly simple, it's fun, and it works very well in most situations. We're gonna bleed into the controls now, but there are the dream sequences, which I think anybody who has played the original games remembers, but even if you haven't, you may have heard of them. And it's a combination of part of them are really poorly done, as well as the controls for this game are not designed for those kind of things. And what I mean is there's areas where you have to walk on this very narrow path, and you go just a little bit too far either way, you will fall off. There is no being locked onto it. Like a lot of games, you go onto a balance beam and you're locked onto it and your character kind of wiggles back and forth. No, you are not locked on at all. If you misstep, you fall, you restart. It sucks. And as it bleeds into the controls just aren't precise enough for that. The controls overall work well enough to get you around, especially in the gunfights, but on those precision sort of platforming areas, they suck. They do not work well. It was incredibly frustrating. It's honestly a cry for this game to be remastered just so they can do better controls for it, because it makes you want to scream. But as I was saying, for the gunfight portions, which is the majority of the game, the controls work well. The movement is good enough. It's still not perfect because, like I said, the controls are not amazing. But then the aiming is also not super precise, which makes that lock-on feature very, very useful, especially if you're on console. I can't remember on PC how good it is because it's been a long time. Now let's get into the graphics, and oh god. I mean, this definitely looks its age. It really, really does. But I do like the visual style overall. I think the noir style that they brought to the game, whether it's in their like kind of comic book looking cutscenes or in the actual game itself, down to like the design of the enemies, the design of the world, really, I think that is fantastic, and it still holds up in that sense. As for the actual graphics, man, wow, it's rough. It really is rough going back and looking at this. Once you get into it, it's kind of easy to look past, but at no point in time are you going to sit there and say, this looks phenomenal, this is one of the best looking games I've ever seen. No, by today's standards, this game looks bad. Even back then, it was pretty rough, but I will say, I still enjoy the vibe, and they do a good job delivering on that vibe in the world that they have built. But yeah, at the same time, it's rough looking. So to wrap this up, I actually had a lot of fun replaying this, but I will say there are some serious struggle bus moments that I was nearly screaming over. I would really love to see like a remaster of this game where they go in and they redo the controls a bit, not just like some HD re-release. I think it would be awesome to redo the controls for this game, and I think I'm actually going to end up going through the trilogy. So overall, I would say at the price of $15, the first Max Payne, can't really say it's worth it. If it's ever on sale for anywhere between like 5 and 10, yeah, I'd say go for it. Okay, so in the comments down below, what's your favorite video game that did the whole slow motion shooting thing? And as always, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that like button. And if you like what I'm doing in general, share and subscribe. Have a good one.